This is my part 2 presentation for what makes a poem, and today we are going to be focusing on presentation and performance aspects in poetry. I'm sure you're kind of seeing where this might be going, because by the end of the week I'm going to have you pick a poem that interests you out of a list of poems and then present them to me through a Flipgrid. So although in class I would usually have you share it with others, I won't have you do it this time, especially since it's potentially your first time reciting a poem. But just keep that in mind that I will be asking you to incorporate a lot of these things I'm going to be talking to you about today when you perform the poem that you pick this week, okay? So these are the things that we're going to be focusing on: projection, enunciation, emotion, pace, and confidence. Okay, so I'll go ahead and present this for you. There we go. If you hear screaming in the back, it's just my husband playing Overwatch, so my apologies. Anyway, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is projection. So projection, when it comes to your voice, when it comes to poetry, means to extend outward. So that's what I want you to do with your voice. I want you to take your voice, even if maybe you have a softer voice or you like to talk quieter, and I want you to push it out, to present it and extend it forward. So when you're presenting a poem effectively, you want to be projecting your voice outward because that helps you sound really strong, it helps you sound confident, and it makes others pay attention to you and your words. Teachers need to project our voices, actors on a stage, especially if you don't have mics, they definitely need to project their voices. So when you're presenting a poem, you're going to do what we have to do, right, when we're talking to a group of people. When you project, your voice needs to come not from your throat, not from like the top of your lungs, but it needs to come from your diaphragm. If you don't know where your diaphragm is, kind of basically think of it as like the bottom of your lungs area. You need to push your voice out from there. So that's going to come from a very deep place, and that's going to make you sound stronger. You also need to open your mouth wider. If you're someone who maybe mumbles, it's probably because you're not opening your mouth very wide. But when you don't open your mouth very wide, it's harder to hear you and it's harder to understand you. So if you open your mouth wider, people are going to be able to hear you better. And I used to do theater when I was younger, and something that my theater directors would always say is to imagine your voice reverberating off the wall or objects in front of you, and that's going to help you practice projecting. So if I was in an auditorium, I would pretend that my voice was bouncing off the far back wall. And if you can imagine yourself doing that, that means that you're projecting, you know, loudly and strongly. Enunciation is the next one. Enunciation means to say or pronounce clearly. Obviously, when you're performing, presenting a poem, poetry is all about word choice, right? They're not just picking random words, they're picking very specific words most of the time. And so you don't want people to be confused about the words that you're choosing. You want it to be very, very clear. So when you're presenting a poem, enunciation helps to ensure your audience doesn't get confused, and it helps to make sure that they can follow you, especially if you're performing a longer poem, right? You want them to keep up with you. When you enunciate, you project, like we were talking about on the last slide. You open your mouth wider as you talk, like we were mentioning before. You're supporting your voice from the diaphragm, and you keep a good, clear pace when you talk. If I was rushing through this presentation, it would be harder for me to enunciate, right? So don't talk too fast, don't talk too slow, have that strong voice, make sure you keep your mouth open, and then you're just going to naturally enunciate. Okay. Emotion is the next one. Emotion is really important in poetry, like I was talking about in my part one video. Poetry very often wants you to feel a certain way when you read the poem. The word choice, the beauty that poetry often talks about can make you feel certain emotions. And so when you're performing or presenting a poem, you need to make that emotion clear. If you read a poem with zero emotion, um, even if the writer took pains to make their words emotional, if you've got an emotionless tone, it doesn't come through. Okay. So showing emotion while performing poetry helps the words and the meaning of the words come alive in the moment. And it also really builds a connection with the audience, because if they see someone else experiencing an emotion right in front of them, we're very likely to also feel a same or similar emotion in ourselves as audience members. When you show emotion while reading a poem, your facial expression is going to change, right? Because if your voice sounds like you're experiencing an emotion, your face is probably also showing it. Your tone changes in your voice, and the pace of your words change, right? If my poem begins with excitement and happiness and joy, my pace might be quicker. But then if the emotion suddenly turns sad, it might get slower. That it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but that's just one example. So I've been talking about pace for the last couple slides, and pace is also super important when you're presenting a poem. Pace is the rate of speed at which you present your poem. And when you present a poem, you don't have to stay at the same exact pace the entire time. It's not like I'm timing you, or you need to get the poem read at a certain amount of time every time. Um, no, but you should have some sort of pace in your poem, and that pace can change. So you don't want to read a poem too fast or too slow, and then you're going to change the pace based on the words or emotions in the poem. If a poem is about being super depressed, you're probably not going to want to read that poem super fast, because speed and emotions that are sad or depressed, they don't really go together, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. And then confidence is the last one. So like I said, this might be the first time that you perform a poem, and that's totally fine, and I completely understand that. But whether or not you yourself feel super confident about reading poetry, you need to try your very best to project confidence. So you may feel small in here, but you can kind of push your voice and push the emotions out to seem like you are confident, right? So confidence allows you to perform a poem effectively. If you're nervous the whole time during your Flipgrid video, I'm going to be more focused on that than on the words you're trying to say, right? So just stick with those words and just make them as true as you can in the moment. So what being confident will look like is standing or sitting tall, which typically pretty much just means pushing your shoulders back and keeping your chin up. Don't bury it in your neck. Try your best to keep your eyes trained on your audience or your camera, and then having strong facial expressions, because that shows me that you're into the poem, right? You are a part of the poem and trying to show the meaning to me as your audience member. Being confident sounds like having a strong voice, using projection and good enunciation, having a serious and focused tone. What I mean by that is not laughing in the middle of the poem if you mess up. It could happen. I'm not bothered about it. I'm not worried about it. But don't just break into giggles, right? Just keep going. And having expressive tones too. Like I mentioned before, you don't want to just kind of have the same facial expression the entire time. It's just less fun to experience, right? So keep that expressive tone going. That's all I have for you today. So I hope that helps you when you're picking a poem to present to me on your Flipgrid video later this week. Let me know if you need any help picking or choosing or practicing it, and I will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.